All right, so ed, ego, superego. Ever heard of them? Maybe even rolled your eyes a little, right?
Oh, yeah. Definitely textbook stuff. Sounds kind of clinical.
Exactly. And for some people, maybe it's a little intimidating, like, is this just for therapists?
Right, right.
But that's not what this deep dive is about. We're going to make
Yeah.
this stuff relatable.
Yeah.
Fun, even.
I like it.
No psych degree needed. And we've got these 2 great blog posts to help us out from the Multicultural Counseling Service.
Oh, those are good.
They really are. And you know what I love about them? They show how ego, superego,
Right.
they're not just ideas.
Right.
They're forces at work in our everyday lives.
Absolutely, all the time.
Okay, so before we get too deep,
Yeah.
real quick overview. When we say ad,
Oh, okay.
what are we actually talking about?
Think instant gratification,
Ooh.
driven by instincts,
Okay.
basic needs, like I'm hungry, thirsty, gotta sleep.
Makes sense.
It's that voice saying, I want it now, W.
So like the kid throwing a tantrum in the grocery store aisle.
Well, maybe not always that dramatic.
No, cool. Okay.
But yeah, you get the idea. Impulsive pleasure-seeking, that's the aid.
Got it. And then there's the ego, trying to keep things in check, right?
Exactly, the voice of reason. Trying to balance the aid
Yeah.
with, reality, consequences, what's actually possible.
So the id's like, eat the whole cake. And the ego's like, hold on, maybe just a slice. We have genes to fit into tomorrow.
Precisely.
Ha! I like that. All right. And then we've got our moral compass, the superego.
Right, internalized authority, values, rules, all that stuff we absorb growing up.
So if the id's like, ooh, shiny object, let's steal it. The superhero's like, no, stealing is wrong. Be honest, respect people's stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, so something both these blog posts emphasize. The id, it gets a bad rap sometimes,
Oh, for sure.
but it's actually essential for survival. One post even says, it's difficult to imagine a life or ordinary existence without it.
That's true.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. Without that drive for food, water, we wouldn't make it. But it goes beyond just basic needs, right?
Okay,
The id gets energy, vitality.
I see
It
it.
pushes us to explore, create, connect with people.
Oh, that's a really good point. It's not just about, like, indulging every whim. It's that life force that keeps us going.
Exactly. And here's another interesting thing. The id is connected to our gut feelings.
Really?
Yeah, those instinctive reactions we have.
So sometimes those gut feelings are the id trying to tell us something.
They can be. Now, of course, we don't want to let the id run wild. Right?
Yeah, definitely that.
And make every decision based on pure instinct.
Makes sense.
But those feelings can be valuable information, especially when we learn to tell them apart from just, impulsive desires.
So it's like the id's giving us raw data, and then the ego steps in, processes it to make a more informed choice.
That's a great way to put it. It's a collaboration, not a dictatorship.
I like that a lot. So how does the ego actually manage this powerful id? One blog uses this analogy of a mediator, someone trying to negotiate between two sides.
I love that analogy. It really captures what the ego does. It's all about compromise, right? Satisfying the id, but in a way that works for the superego and the real world too.
Okay, so let's say the id wants that extra piece of cake.
Yeah.
But the superego is saying, absolutely not. Health goals, remember. How does the ego navigate that situation?
That's where problem solving comes in.
Ah, okay.
The ego might suggest a compromise, like a smaller piece or maybe a healthier dessert option. Finding that middle ground where everyone, even the id, feels heard.
The ego's like a tough job.
It does. That's why strengthening the ego is so important.
I
The
does.
stronger it is, the better we are at managing those internal conflicts,
Makes sense.
making choices that are good for us, that match our values and goals.
All right, so we've got this dynamic duo, the id and the ego. But where does the superego fit in? We know it's the moral compass. But how does it actually influence our behavior day to day?
We'll think of it as an internal filter. For our thoughts, our actions, it's always evaluating. Are we living up to our standards of right and wrong? It can motivate us to do the right thing, even when it's hard.
So like when you get too much change back at the store and you feel that urge to just pocket it,
Right?
but your superego's like, nope, gotta return it.
Exactly. It's that sense of integrity, moral obligation, even when no one's watching.
Interesting. But there's a caution about the superego too. Both these posts mention it. It can be a bit of a harsh taskmaster.
That's true. While it's super important for moral development, it can get a bit demanding. If we're not careful, it can lead to guilt, shame, feeling inadequate.
So like, too much of a good thing.
Exactly. A healthy superego, it guides us,
Yeah.
helps us make ethical choices. But an overly rigid one,
Yeah.
that can lead to perfectionism, even self-sabotage.
It's like those people who are always putting themselves down, even when they're achieving amazing things.
Right.
It's like their inner critic is on overdrive.
And that's where the ego's role as mediator is so important. Again, it needs to balance the superego's demands with a realistic view of ourselves, a compassionate one.
So it's not about silencing the superego completely. It's about learning to work with it in a healthier way.
Exactly.
Finding that balance between striving for the best and accepting that we're not perfect.
Perfectly said.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating trio. Id with its desires, ego keeping things in check, superego with its moral standards. Now, both these blog posts use an analogy I absolutely love, the horse and the rider.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's such a vivid image.
It is.
It helps us understand how these forces relate to each other. Think of the id as this powerful horse, full of energy, drive.
It wants to run free, follow its instincts.
And the ego's the rider.
Yeah.
Trying to hold on, steer this wild thing in the right direction.
Exactly. And the rider needs skill, awareness. It's not about dominating the horse. It's about harnessing that power.
I'd love
directing it in a way that's satisfying, beneficial.
I can already see where this is going. If the rider's inexperienced, loses focus.
Oh, yeah.
That horse can easily take over, run wild.
And that's what can happen in our own lives when we let impulses take over.
Yeah.
Or we're overly critical of ourselves. We lose sight of our strengths, our values.
This analogy is really hitting home for me. I'm starting to see how my own id, ego, and superego are always interacting.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It really is. And it makes me think about how I can become a better writer in my own life. I think we need to unpack this more, though. Should we pick this up after a quick break?
Absolutely. Let's delve deeper. Explore what it really means to strengthen those ego muscles.
Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back with part 2 of our deep dive into the id, ego, and superego. Welcome back, everyone. I'm still thinking about that horse and rider analogy. It's such a powerful image for the id, ego, superego thing.
It really is, and it shows how important it is to develop that ego strength, those writing skills that help us through life.
Yeah, totally. Both these blog posts emphasize that understanding these forces, it can actually give us more self-awareness, help us make better choices. But how does that work in practice?
Okay, so think about it this way. When we're aware of the id's impulses, we can kind of anticipate them.
Okay.
Find healthier ways to satisfy them.
So give me an example.
Like, let's say you tend to overspend when you're stressed.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right. So instead of hitting that buy now button,
Yeah.
you develop other coping mechanisms.
Like what?
Going for a run, calling a friend, anything but immediately giving in to that urge.
So instead of just reacting, we can actually choose a different path.
Exactly. And it's the same with the superego.
Oh, interesting.
When we understand that our inner critic can be a little harsh, we can challenge those negative thoughts. Instead of beating ourselves up for every mistake,
which I do a lot of,
we practice self-compassion, focus on learning from the experience.
So it's not about suppressing the id or silencing the superego. It's about finding that balance, right?
Yes, that middle ground.
Where we can honor our needs and values, but not let one force take over completely.
You got it. And that's where the ego's skills as a mediator come in. Problem solver, all that.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do we actually strengthen our ego? It feels kind of abstract.
I know, right?
What are some, ego workouts we can do in our daily lives?
Well, both blog posts mention mindfulness.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
Mindfulness is all about paying attention to the present moment.
Okay.
Without judgment. It's noticing your thoughts, your feelings, but not getting swept away by them.
So, if I have the urge to devour an entire bag of chips,
right,
I don't just do it mindlessly. I pause, observe the urge.
Exactly.
And then decide how to respond.
That pause, that awareness, that's where the ego gets stronger.
I see.
It gives us the chance to choose a response that's in line with our goals, our values. Right. When we take care of our physical and emotional needs, getting enough sleep, eating well, managing stress, we're giving the ego the resources it needs to function at its best.
So it's like giving our ego a good night's sleep so it can handle whatever comes its way.
I love that, like making sure the rider's well rested and ready.
To handle that wild horse.
Exactly.
Mindfulness, self-care. What else?
Learning to set healthy boundaries.
Boundaries.
Yes. Saying no to things that drain us, compromise our values, protecting our time, our emotional well-being.
So saying no is actually an act of ego strength.
It absolutely is. It's asserting our needs, our priorities.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Even then. It shows ourselves and others that we respect our own limits.
That we're capable of making those tough choices.
Yes. It's not about saying yes to everything and everyone. It's about knowing what truly matters to us.
And having the courage to stick to it.
Exactly. And it can be especially hard for people who are used to, people-pleasing.
Oh, yeah. Putting everyone else's needs first.
Exactly. But the more we practice boundaries, the stronger those ego muscles get.
This is really empowering. It's like we're not just stuck with whatever ego strength we're born with.
Right.
We can actually cultivate it, develop it over time.
That's the beauty of it. And the more we invest in it, the better we handle those internal conflicts.
Makes sense.
We make choices that lead to a more fulfilling life.
A more meaningful life.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier. The superego being too harsh. Both posts caution about the downsides of a strong superego. Why is that?
Well, remember, the superego is essential for moral development. It helps us know right from wrong.
Right.
Motivates us to live up to our values.
So it's not about getting rid of it.
No, not at all. It's about finding that balance, where it guides us, supports us, but doesn't become overly critical or punishing.
Okay, but how do we know if our superegos cross that line? What are the signs that our inner critic's gotten too loud?
One sign is constant self-criticism. If you're always putting yourself down, focusing on your flaws, never feeling good enough, that could be a sign.
So it's not just about having high standards. It's how we talk to ourselves, the level of self-acceptance we have.
Exactly. And another sign is perfectionism.
Oh, interesting.
Now, striving for excellence, that's good.
Right.
But perfectionism can be paralyzing. It stops us from taking risks, trying new things.
Yeah, I get that.
Even enjoying the present moment.
So true. I've been there, feeling so afraid to make a mistake that I end up doing nothing at all.
I know, right?
It's like that inner critic's holding me back.
And that's where the ego, as mediator, is so key. It can help us challenge those perfectionistic tendencies.
Okay.
Encourage a more balanced, realistic perspective.
So it's about recognizing when those superego messages aren't helpful.
Yes.
And then using our ego strength to reframe them. Choose a more compassionate approach.
Exactly. Being kind to ourselves even when we mess up.
Yeah.
Remembering we're human. We're all works in progress.
I like that. It makes me think about those times when I'm super hard on myself, like when I make a mistake at work or don't reach a goal. It's like my superego's voice gets louder and louder.
I get it. And in those moments, it's so important to remember, you have the power to choose a different response.
Oh.
Acknowledge those feelings, the disappointment, the frustration, but don't let them define you.
It's like saying to my superego, thanks for the feedback, but I'm choosing a more compassionate way to handle this.
That's it. Taking the reins, guiding that horse.
Even when it's a little riled up.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered mindfulness, self-care, setting boundaries, working with the superego in a healthier way. Any other ego workouts we should be doing?
One that's often overlooked is simply challenging ourselves.
Oh, interesting.
When we step outside our comfort zones, face our fears, we're building ego strength in a very real way.
So it's like what doesn't challenge you doesn't change you.
Exactly. And these challenges don't have to be huge life changes. It could be trying a new hobby, having a tough conversation, setting a small goal and sticking to it.
That's good to hear. It means we have opportunities to strengthen our ego every day.
We do. In small ways, big ways. The more we practice, the stronger and more adaptable we get.
This has been so helpful, but I'm curious, what are the benefits of having a strong ego? What does it actually look like in action, being a skilled writer?
That's a great question. I think we need to dig into that a bit more.
Yeah, let's do it.
Should we take a quick break and come back to that?
Absolutely. Let's explore the rewards of a well-developed ego. See how it can help us navigate life's ups and downs with more resilience, more grace. Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back with the final part of our deep dive into the id, ego, and superego. Welcome back to our deep dive. As we've been talking about this, I've realized that having a strong ego, it's not about being like super rigid, always choosing the most logical option.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. People think strong ego equals perfect rationality. Total control all the time.
Right. But these blog posts suggest something different. A well-developed ego is actually flexible.
Absolutely.
Adaptable.
It's like, remember that horse and rider?
Oh, yeah.
A skilled rider knows when to hold tight and when to give the horse some freedom.
That's a good point. It's not just about managing impulses then, it's about realizing life throws curveballs.
Exactly.
Sometimes you got to be adaptable, creative.
Right. A strong ego lets us find creative solutions, compromise when we need to, adapt to change without losing our values.
So, if the id's the impulsive horse,
Hmm.
and the superego's the strict instructor, the ego's the one out there in the field making the decisions.
I love that, integrating all those voices.
Yeah.
Is, wants, the superego's rules, what's actually happening.
And coming up with a plan that works. This makes me think about how the blog posts say the ego's like a muscle. We can strengthen it over time. So besides mindfulness, self-care, boundaries, what are some ways to work out our ego, make it more resilient?
Well, like any muscle, challenge makes it stronger.
Okay.
When we step outside our comfort zones, face our fears, try new things.
We're giving the ego a workout.
Exactly.
But not pushing too hard.
Right.
Yeah.
Got to find that sweet spot. Stretching our limits, but not breaking ourselves.
And these challenges, they don't have to be huge, right?
Nope. Could be small stuff. Trying a new recipe, having a tough conversation, setting a small goal and sticking to it.
So every day we have chances to build those ego muscles.
We do. And the more we do it, the stronger we get.
I like that. Okay, so lots of talk about strengthening the ego, but what's the payoff? What does a healthy, strong ego actually look like in someone's life?
Well, one of the big things is emotional stability.
Okay.
People with strong egos, they're less reactive to stress.
So they don't freak out as easily.
Basically, they regulate their emotions better. Less likely to, lose it when things get tough.
Like having a shock absorber for life's bumps.
Perfect analogy.
Hmm.
And this stability, it leads to better relationships too.
I can see that.
They communicate their needs better, set boundaries, handle conflict in a healthy way.
Makes sense. If you're more stable inside, you're not projecting your stuff onto others.
Right. Another benefit is self-awareness. They know their strengths, weaknesses, values, what motivates them.
So they can make choices that are true to themselves.
Exactly. Not swayed by pressure or expectation.
We're like having a strong internal compass.
That's it. And this self-awareness leads to self-acceptance too.
Okay.
Embracing imperfections, appreciating their unique qualities.
So less self-criticism, less comparing themselves to others.
Exactly. They cultivate self-compassion, appreciate the journey, even the ups and downs.
As you're saying this, I'm realizing strong ego, it's not just about personal well-being.
Nope.
It affects how we show up in the world too.
Absolutely. These folks are more resilient, adaptable, resourceful.
They handle challenges better, solve problems, contribute their talents.
Exactly.
So it's not just about feeling better. It's about being more effective, more impactful.
Yes. Becoming the best versions of ourselves. For our own good, and for the good of others.
Well, listeners, I'm feeling pretty inspired to work on my ego muscles. It's clear that investing in our ego strength is so valuable.
I agree.
For our growth, our well-being.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
As we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought for you. If the ego's like a muscle, what exercises can you do to make it stronger?
It's a journey, not a destination. We're always learning, growing in this area.
And remember, every choice, every challenge, it's a chance to flex that ego muscle. Become more skilled writers in this crazy adventure called life.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey. We hope you've learned something valuable about the id, ego, and superego. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the ideas that shape our lives,